Martin, did you want to?
Did I want to say something? Yes. So this is pretty awesome. Like tonight, we've got three communities coming together, sort of like extended families, the holiday season, Christmas, whatever. We got Business Agility Meetup Melbourne, Sooner Saver Happier, Team Topologies. It should be pretty fun. So we mentioned asking questions in chat and holding it across, which is great. And yeah, any questions we ask, things we can't resolve tonight, we'll like endeavor to follow up afterwards. There's a couple actually there's a couple other sessions with this going on in Europe-friendly time zones and America's friendly time zones next week.
Can I just say before we get into it that
Sure.
this is my favorite meetup of the BVSSH year because it is a chance for in-person connection, depending on where we all are, and to be able to actually then share insight as an Asia Pacific region, because sometimes there are things that are common, sometimes there are things that are not. So being able to kind of reflect, to take a step back and to reflect on the year, I think is a great thing to do. I also wanted to give a bit of a shout out to the SSH advocates online, as well as in the room, and to Ruma, who's just joined the team as of this week.
And we also have a couple of TTs, advocates online as well, which is awesome to see. So thanks for joining us, guys.
Yeah, perfect. And so it's this combination of like-minded people, I think, that is bringing us all here. So let's talk about the report, the Business Agility Report, because I think it's a great anchoring for the insights that are there globally, but also what does it then mean for us? And let's unpack what does it mean for us?
I think it's going to be pretty valuable as practitioners. But before we do that, let's get started with acknowledging the traditional custodians of this land on which we're meeting today. So if you're in Melbourne, that's the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. Now, I'd like to say a little bit more than that, just as a bit of an like education on what else can we learn about First Nations. So today we picked a factoid that not all Aboriginal nations have like this linear version of time. There's a lot of like finishing the year doesn't exist if you have a more like circular view of time, which is what Curry culture has that's further up in Queensland. So there's been, as long as the screen refreshes, yep. So in the corner borders between Queensland, New South Wales, and South Australia, there's these more circular stone arrangements. And those are how like Aboriginal peoples were tracking the progression of the seasons. But one season follows another. It's not really beginning and end. It's not like birth to death kind of thing. So I thought that would be interesting to mention today, as it's a little bit different than us calling it an end of the year. So with that, today we're here to talk about the Business Agility Report. It's the 7th edition of the report, so been starting in 2018. And I think before we go too deeply into that, it's important to set a little bit of context, a lot of new people to this. Why should you care about the report? Who publishes it? All that stuff. What am I doing talking about it here? So the Business Agility Report is published by the Business Agility Institute, BAI. They're an independent research and advocacy organization. They run some meetups, which is why we're here. And they're really trying to, put up the next generation of companies that are more nimble and flexible, super duper compatible with what Sooner Safer Happier and Team Topologies are trying to do. I've been involved as a researcher since 2018. That might sound like the first edition of the report, and also meetup co-host since 2022, which is the space that we're in right now. I personally do this because the report and the survey help provide external validation as to the work I do day to day with Teamform. So, are we actually improving organizations as we tackle the problems, the challenges that we're looking at today? Do we actually get those benefits? And what I really like about the report and the research behind it is it says ultimately yes. So the report is built on a model or a domain model, if you will, underpins the whole thing. There's 5 domains, culture, customer centricity, people first leadership, operations, and sort of value-based delivery. Behind that, there's 18 capabilities, and they're observed with 80 or more behaviors. The domain does keep on evolving year on year. And we know through a lot of external validation that the model and the report are statistically sound. That's important here. And also that because there's a certain amount of repeatability year on year, it actually sets a very high bar for social sciences style research. Most recently, in 2023, this chap out of Switzerland, Xavier Branlet, published a paper that also, in order to get to what he was actually trying to do, he provided another form of external validation on the report. So if you've got any questions about that, happy to talk about it at some point externally. But yeah, very strong confidence here about the statistical significance of what we're about to dive into. So the business agility report. It's based on a survey. There's two parts of it. So there's quantitative, like how do you feel about these things on a 1 to 5 scale, and some of the really nice juice about like what's going on the ground comes out of the long form answers that people talk to. The survey generates a maturity rating on a 0 to 10 scale. So a lot of the numbers you're going to see are going to be between those parts. And the trend that we're seeing on the scale is probably more important than the number itself. So like a 5.1 or 5.2, whatever. But, you know, is it going upwards? Is it going downwards? Is it a big drop up, big drop down? That's the interesting stuff. Who responds to this thing? Well, being a survey, it's self-selecting. And yeah, we had just a bit under 400 people respond this year. Broad range of roles, broad range of levels in the company, geography, industry. But what's nice to know about it are the people responding, about a third of them are senior leaders. A third of them are transformation staff. So you've got a formal way of working transformation office, and the rest is that other third. We also have 300 unique organizations which have responded this year, 2,000 across time since the start of the report. And on those organizations, over 50% of them are large. They've got 1,500 or more staff. So a lot of what we're talking about here is really looking towards that larger end of the house where stuff gets a bit hairy. And because it's been running for 7 years, we've got multi-year longitudinal data. So we can start talking about what are the trends, you know, what happens to those organizations as they go through this journey, which makes it a bit of fun. So report findings. So today we're not going to read through the report. You can go download it. I'll share the QR code and all that good stuff at the end. But we really want to go through a couple of the key trends and takeaways. And the big one is the graph you should see now, which is like there's an upward trend. So 2024 is a return to upward trend. The average ratings from all respondents across the world has been going upwards. This is pretty neat. You know, last year there was a little bit of concern because things went down for like the first time. But there was a lot of like economic downturn elements happening in 2023 and some of the months before that. So I guess we've got a fairly consistent story that year on year, averaging out the bumps, we're going upwards. Cultural capabilities had the biggest jump. So acting as one or collaboration is up like 28%, a lot more transparency. And a really good one that's harder to do is there's an increased ability to prioritize over the last year. So it's sort of signaling that growing need for organizations to concentrate on what's most important to them, right, and be able to make those choices. The longer form responses also indicate two big shifts behind this. The first one is there's an increased focus on resilience and adaptability in response to change, you know, particularly economic and market challenges. We'll go a little bit deeper on this ahead, but also that the overall trend of business agility, nimbleness is being lifted up. It's no longer solely buried within like the technology or specific product and software parts. So in other words, agile concepts are increasingly going mainstream, part as business as usual, which has some interesting impacts. So as it's going mainstream, we also hear respondents say stuff that there's less large transformation activities going on. You know, there's also less hiring of agility-specific specialists, and we're seeing slightly more generalist roles. So a good example of this is there are less Scrum Master roles, something we've heard a lot, but also more change managers being hired. So it's a bit of a career shift opportunity happening there. And yeah, so there's also a lot of benefits that organizations get behind this, and the high-level things are commercial outcomes. So now with 7 years running, we've got strong correlation to financial sort of business growth, customer growth. Customer satisfaction is up for high performers, and then productivity, that ability to deliver. Maria, how does that sound on the ground?
Well, to be honest with you, I was surprised.
Yep.
So I was surprised with the fact that there was a trend up. And I think we're going to get into the Asia Pac results, which show something similar. So I'm generally an optimist, but I was a little skeptical about the uptick. And I think what is right, or the things that resonate with me, because I've been working across energy, across telco, across insurance, across government, you know, and the banks. And I think what I see is there aren't large transformation budgets. Yes, absolutely. I think with the cost constraints, that's tightened them. I think this is something that I've been seeing for the last few years now. So, and I also don't see lots of organizations hiring lots of agile coaches either. So I think there is a bit of a shift. The thing that I think that also surprises me about the report is I'm not so sure that means that ways of working or agility is now mainstream. What I'm seeing is actually people are hiring for project managers and change managers. So I'm wondering what's going to happen in the next few years, because all the benefits that we've had with those organizations that have been more progressive with ways of working, if we're hiring for those more traditional roles, if we haven't actually changed the intent or if we haven't changed the system, are we going to regress? So these are the things that I'm thinking about and seeing. And so the uptick was a surprise to me. And so then I was then curious, well, then who actually responded, to the report? Is this a need to feel good from last year? Because I think, collectively speaking, I think it was all a little bit not great. So is that maybe something that's going on there? Yeah, so I don't know.
Should we jump into what the region says?
Yeah, let's.
Fantastic. So some regional insights. So I think particularly if you got this Asia Pacific, Australia, New Zealand style focus, the numbers for Australia and New Zealand are below the global averages. So like the quick takeaway from scanning this is that difference is red versus the average. So across the board, it is lower. There's a couple interesting bits though, is we're seeing that healthcare is driving above the overall average for Australia and New Zealand. And if you want to see like which industry is like feeling the saddest in this space, it's government. So, so I think that helps to correlate a little bit of what we might be seeing on the ground.
Well, so I guess maybe just to seed some questions for the group, because what I would love to, and I think what we'd all love to explore a little bit in the once we go through all the findings is anyone working in healthcare? I haven't, so that's interesting to me. Is anyone working in government? I am. I'm not surprised with the below average, maybe. But in the other sectors that you're then working in, like what are we then seeing? Is it an up? Is it the same? Is it down? What's the feel? What's the feel on the ground? So hold that question and we'll come back to it as we go.
Hold that question. And then I'm not sure if there's anyone joining us from Singapore, Malaysia, or other parts of Asia, but like it's a slightly different picture there where we see overall like where that region is scoring above average, particularly in value-based delivery, which I thought sort of neat given the sample sizes and all this. We don't know why this is just sort of like the regions do have quite a bit of a difference. So let's go back to a few other like more generic report things. So high scoring organizations, as practitioners, what can we learn? What do they do? So this next part hasn't changed over the past few years. They tend to have a formal change program, right? So this ability of actually having a formal transformation thing has been important, and it's typically led from above. So like the board, the C-suite. They're looking to change the way of working. They're not trying to do this in just one business unit. So this is for the larger organizations, but it's usually like the whole organization or at least multiple business units to span value streams at the same time. And those organizations also tend to score highly in the 3 key predictive indicators, which is what you've got on the screen right now. What are these key predictive indicators? So if we look at the respondents of the survey, the ones that score really highly, what do they have in common? They do 3 things. They fund work dynamically. This has been at the top since day 0, the ability to change how you spend within your fixed envelope. Organization, like not many organizations can do that. The ones who can adapt quite a bit. They integrate diverse ideas so they can they can source ideas from across the company and they can test them out. So it's not just like the boss says, if you will. And they empower accountability, right? So if you want to try something, there's ability to empower and delegate, but also hold accountable. I think, Luke, you had some thoughts on this. I'm going to just give you a microphone to make sure it picks up well.
So I like the integrating diverse ideas thing that resonates with me. So teams of smart people solving problems together, defining what they're going to build based on what customers actually want, but also what the team needs to maintain their flow as a long-lived team. All this being asked for your opinion impacts on your psychological safety and all that other goodness around autonomy, mastery, and purpose, of course. I think there's a strong connection with empowerment, with accountability here as well. And there's a lot of talk of humans, happier staff and happier customers throughout the report. I was just watching something, I think it was by Nick Toon the other night, talking about how the best products are built by happy teams of smart people. So yeah.
That resonates in the H in BVSSH with happier. So yeah, agreed.
What other benefits might we be seeing? Clicks on the thing again. So the report goes into further depth about what people are pulling on this, and we're not going to spend a huge amount of time on benefits, but the high performers also tend to have shorter time to market. They're better at prioritizing, which is also one of those big highlights from this year, just across the board. They're better at deploying the skills and roles of people they have to the work that needs it, and also nurturing those skills, so becoming that learning organization. They're more adaptable to change. They're better at employee retention because I guess if it's a better environment, people are more tend to stay there, which is a trend that we've seen, particularly 2022, 2021 pandemic, and also when there was a lot of like people hiring who was sticking around was the employee engagement part. And yeah, they're much better at collaboration.
So something interesting about what you said though, Martin, around the high scorers have had the top-down big transformations. Like if the shift now is moving to it, we don't have the big budgets and it needs to be done BAU.
Yep.
Like again, it makes me pause and wonder what's then going to happen in the next few years. And what do we then need to do? Like what ninja moves are we going to then need to create to then unlock those things? Because if that's what's been driving the numbers thus far, then we need to think of another way to drive the high agility scores.
Yeah.
Maybe from a slightly more positive perspective, maybe agility has finally embedded itself to the point where organizations are starting to look at things like value streams and they're starting to focus on flow. Some of the things we're seeing are things like organizations adopting platform and product operating models so that they can untangle some of the organizational complexity that's holding them back from doing that. So
yeah, so great point, Luke. And maybe this is more just a sense of because all those things that you just described there in my mind are elements then of the business agility. So maybe maybe there's an evolution here of what it is that we're talking about and how that starts to shift or expand. But yeah, let's keep going because we're going to talk about those things.
Yeah. To seed something new this year is we never had an option before of like, is nobody leading this? Is it happening ground up? And the question was added, or the option was added in August, and already like it's like 14% of respondents, and those ones score really highly. So this is like nascent observing it, but there's definitely some groundswell. There are people that are taking this into their own hands, and they're feeling pretty good about it. So to be watched in the years to come.
Yeah, and Stephen online has said he's seeing more pragmatic, slower changes in targeted ways as well. Yeah, and I think that's the way to go. Think big, start small, learn fast. Yes.
100%. So yeah, bottom line for human-centric organizations, what we find from the report is they're good at creating financial value. They create engaged workforces, and those benefits do accrue over time. There's also a few other neat correlations. Like we like trying new experiments of like, what else does this tell us? So this year we've been able to find a direct relationship. I say relationship, it's not causal yet, but high performers, like, they have higher company revenues. So there's about half of the respondent companies are public companies. So you can basically see like their dollars over time. Mm-hmm. And also there's a direct relationship between those high scores and their employee engagement ratings, the public ones. So this is going to mine Glassdoor. Finding those high scores, they tend to have like much more positive views from like the people that go to Glassdoor than the ones that don't. So that was good, a bit of fun. And yeah, to talking about accruing over time, there are some definite tranches that have been like, I guess, formalizing themselves over the past few years. The first bit of benefits, customer-facing stuff tends to show up pretty quickly, like about 1 year from a more formal program. A lot more of the benefits show up in the 3-year mark and a bigger chunk at 8 years. But what happens to the companies that like we've been tracking year over year over year here? So 9 out of 10 of them saw multi-year benefits year on year. There's 2 cohorts. If we're going to further subdivide that, there's the strong performers of that, and they saw benefits of up to 34% year on year, which is pretty neat. And then there's a marginal one, which is the quarter respondents, which still have some benefits, but it's not like, crazy stuff. But yeah, I think the overall message there, 9 out of 10, is pretty darn powerful. So we're on the right track here.
And I think the thing to build on here is there actually needs to be the so what. So again, if we then tie this then back to then the outcomes, like what are we optimizing for? And I think in however it is that we go about it and do it, we need to think about that up front, because I think it's no longer going to be a leap of faith or a trust me. It needs to be, well, what are we doing and how are we going to do it and for what benefit? So I think these bottom line indicators are helpful.
Show me that you can deliver. And that was definitely something high on that benefits list. all the organizations that said they were scoring really well, the word delivery just kept on coming up and up and up and up in their responses. So let's go for a few focus areas and break from the mainline part of the report here. So today we're going to set up for the discussion, and we're going to look at 3 specific areas from the report that we thought sort of connected well with the Business Agility Institute, Sooner, Safer, Happier, and Team Topology space. So the first part, we'll look at challenges relating to leadership. So like, what can we find there? Challenges relating to structure, organizational structure. So if you're stuck in a functional silo, then you're not really collaborating or anything like that, right? And we're going to look at governance, which is a few people around here that might have written a book on agile governance. Anyways, if you're in Melbourne, it's always a spicy one. Let's get through to that. So leadership. Year on year on year, consistently inside of the report, when people ask I ask one question, like, what is the #1 challenge? And it's like leadership's in there all the time. It's also, this year, we've been able to look at the impact that these challenges have. And this is also the strongest one by impact, which is sort of what the graph on the right-hand side is telling you. Impact and frequency, look for this one. So what do we want to hear about this? Like, there's a lot of other challenges that connect through to leadership. There's a bit on mindset, like there's a lot of feedback in this space that, agility is just for technology, or there's a specific meta model or framework you should be downloading here. And, like there's a bit, like, it's not just about shifting from command and control. We also see in the challenge space linked to leadership, there's a lot of issues with having clear goals. So what does this like manifest itself in the organization? You ask 2 people in the same organization, so like, what's the objective? What are we trying to get done this year? And you get wildly different answers, both in terms of the work being done, but if there's specific like agility transformation initiatives, you might find that you get wildly different answers there. And last but not least, like limited scope or confusing blends of ways of working is all stuff that's related to leadership. So you walk into an org and, finance is operating in a completely different way. The technology is operating a completely different way than the ones that serve your small business customers. You're going to have some problems. Maria, why might this be important?
Leaders make it or break it. And so I think this has been, as you said, this is a common theme, I think, throughout the report and the findings. I think this is common in my own experience. I think the thing that I would say in the last year is I'm not seeing necessarily a lot of leaders being open to change. I think I see a lot of leaders that are overwhelmed. I think I see a lot of leaders that are just trying to get the stuff done and trying to make sense of it all and trying to respond to change. And so the thing that I think that we could probably help the most, or where I've been spending a bit of my time, is actually helping on that strategy definition, because unless we get focused in the work that we're doing and the outcomes that we're going after and how we're going to do that and be clear on the priorities and then stop work, it's just then too hard for a leader, let alone for us, to then be able to work out how should we then change, because that is overwhelming. And so I think if we focus there first, we can then help them define where they're going and how they're going to get there in a different way, unlike how they would have done it before, which actually is helping them to change their ways of working. So again, there's a bit of a ninja move there. And whether that's, using OKRs or just even as simple as visualizing all the work, because the work comes from across various teams. So this is about horizontal collaboration. If we haven't quite gotten to value streams yet, this is about horizontal collaboration. So how do we visualize all the work and then connect the work to what that focus then needs to be, or create the golden thread of value, as I love to say. Then that's, I think those are very great starting points to then help all leaders, because we just don't have that in a lot of team of teams or organizations.
Yep.
In addition to what Maria was saying, I think there's a lot of lessons that that leaders can learn and that we can support leaders with, that have been learned from the DevOps movement around silos, handoffs, and delays, that we can kind of bottle and repeat. Bit of a soapbox about leaders. I think my opinion on this one is ways of working is for everyone, not just the people that do the work, which is something that I often see when I go to work. The old ways of leading and managing are so not compatible with the way that we do our work at the moment. I was just reading Project to Product the other night, another one of our wonderful book friends. And they're talking about the age of software and knowledge work rather than the age of manufacturing. But there are some cool things that the age of manufacturing we seem to have forgotten. So the focus on flow, thinking about end to end, building things like safety in, you can't make a decision like safety's tech debt or safety's an annoying thing that we'll do later. Safety's how we build. And what else did I write down? And Gemba. So walking around and actually looking at what your teams are doing is something that I don't see happening. So yeah, some of the lessons from manufacturing that we could definitely, repeat.
Yeah. So maybe if there's one practical thing there, Luke, it's how do we get leaders to get closer to the work? And how do they understand what the work is first and foremost? Yeah.
Visualize it all and walk around and have a look.
I think a fun takeaway, and this is something you said the other day, right, is a lot of our community does support leaders. So how can we help them? How can we be more effective at that? How can we better help them so that they're successful, basically delivering the change that we're looking for? So second focus area, organizational structures. So this one is the second most mentioned thing in terms of frequency, and it's the second biggest in terms of impact. What do I mean by this? So we're talking about organizational structures, how people are put together, or sort of what the org chart kind of looks like in the company. But the call outs that people had they're too complex, right? It's difficult to understand, navigate who does what. The structures are disconnected. In other words, they're not aligned to flow. So you can see work bounce around between different business units, hard to navigate. Who do I even know to call to figure this out? We see them as being overly interdependent, right? So there's too many dependencies, complex dependencies, hidden dependencies. I know my professional work life, I once found a process that had to bounce 127 steps to get from start to finish across all the business units the company had. Definitely some challenges there. And then sort of if organizational structures are too complex, the ninja move there is sometimes to run a restructure to try to realign it. But we also had a lot of respondents say that button is potentially being hit too often. So too frequent restructures, right? So if you're doing this too too often, then teams are spending more time adapting to change and delivering work, right? So it's kind of like that other extreme. I think we're looking for something sensible in between, and finding those balances is always hard. Maria, value stream.
So I'm just going to shout out BMK on the chat, who said that he's seeing in New Zealand that the restructure is a bit of a thing. So I think that's resonating as well. I think whatever we do, it doesn't have to be about a restructure. I think what we're talking about when we talk about silos and being able to navigate the system is actually about how do we bring people together to work together on a shared outcome with clear vision, clear purpose, and have actually accountability to do the things that we need to do. If I strip it down to what a value stream is looking to achieve, that's actually what we're looking to do. And so it doesn't have to be about a restructure, it doesn't have to be about reporting lines. It actually just needs to be about bringing people together and setting them up for success. And so I guess with that, there are some organizations that I could name for you that are doing that well. There are a few that are truly doing it end to end. So I think this is still something over the next few years that we need to unlock more of. Is what I would say about it.
Excellent. And yeah, I think the other related pickup on value streams, right, is they don't have to be done by restructures. You can have a cross-functional teaming or project system that gets that in place. And the visibility of the customer inside that value stream is super duper important. So the ones that had again, back to business agility report findings, if you could see who the actual end customer is, you tend to be doing better. I'm talking end customer, not the sponsor that's paying in this case.
It's a John Smartism, but long-lived customers on long-lived teams that use long-lived products. So the other org charts, I'm going to have a chat. All right. So we're seeing a lot of organizations, apart from organizing around value and setting up things like value stream, starting to decouple the complex organizational complexity that sits behind the architecture side of things. So things have just been clobbered on top of each other and built and built and built and built by projects. And yeah, we're starting to see organizations decoupling that for fast flow, which is also helping them with their operational efficiency. The other thing about org charts is they're pretty kind of sad things in terms of the impact that they have on companies and people. One of the things that Matthew talks about in Team Topologies is that they not just do they restrict flow, but they also restrict things like possibilities, opportunities, and ideas because of reporting lines and because of the way that people communicate with each other in the organization. And another great quote from Ruth Milan is that if the architecture of the organization and the system are at odds, it's the architecture of the organization that wins every time.
And so Matthew Skelton's actually online with us, Luke.
Whoa, hello.
And I think, Matthew, you're saying your new favorite phrase is don't reorganize people, reorganize purpose. And so, yeah, very much aligned, with that as well.
Yeah, definitely something to see in the professional world. I think a lot of restructures don't have as much information on hand as they should. Like sometimes the visibility of the work is not there. So there's definitely a place for improvement in that. And yeah, I think the Ruth Milan quote really connects with the whole Conway's law. The way people are organized tends to be the way your product is built, tends to be the way your product or service works. Which shifts us to our third focus area to really try to seed that conversation, governance. So governance is fun. Most organizations say that they're bad at it. And I think our goal here is trying to find better ways of empowering with accountability, with reasonable guardrails. Way easier said than done. So on the screen, what I'm sharing here is most like the most cited governance challenges that people have. But from the responses, we also heard that 29% of organizations said they indicated the governance policies did promote business agility or more nimble behaviors. And we're like, well, that's interesting. What do they have to say about that? So 3 things came up in common about those. And this is something of a bit of a takeaway. They'll tend to have a delegation framework. So someone's actually thought down and thought, like, what sort of decision rights does who have when? And let's make that really clear so that we're all walking up on the same page with this. They will tend to push decisions downwards, which is one of the focus areas we want to ask, so that not every question has to run up and down to a business unit lead, the CEO, or not. You're really clear. You're inside a team. You know where your decisions rights are, and you're held accountable for what you've done. And then last but not least, transparency. And this, I heard various different slices of this, but it's basically that the big decisions are explained, like, hey, we chose to go this way. Recognize it's not what everybody in the business wanted, but here's the reasons why, right? A short explainer really, really came through in the long form responses of people being like, organizations that do that, you've got much more alignment afterwards. Okay, I get it. I've been heard. We're going to go forward. But also having a place to go where you can see these decisions afterwards. So, like that email that was sent last month that you can't find anymore that explains what's going on. Instead, consider for the places that are physical, an Obeya room, or even just dashboards or a place for the big decisions of the past quarter or past year. So that really resonated a lot in what we heard. Another fun fact on governance. So we had quite a few respondents say that organizations have been working on delegation, working on improving it. And that they were trying. There was versions of delegation frameworks out there, but they weren't yet live or endorsed, if you will. And a lot of the people that said that, it wasn't just like a 1 year or 2 year thing. It's like, I've been here for 5 years, been trying to improve the governance. There's a thing that's 99% ready to go, and it hasn't quite caught yet. So if that's your organization, I think the big takeaway is like, maybe it's time to hit the go button and see what actually happens.
And the impact on people and teams when you push decisions down is incredible. I think not just in terms of governance, in terms of prioritization, in terms of what they're going to build, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. I think what this highlights to me is that governance is not a steering committee and it's not a RACI. And so what we're talking about here is it's a mindset. So it's how do we think about risk? How do we think about empowerment? How do we think about transparency? How do we think about empowering people? Like that's what that first one is. Then it's about the actual guardrails from a policy and procedure point of view. It's then about the right guardrails that we have then in place that we embed within the work so that we don't have these stop points along the way that then tell us what we can or can't do, that we then need to, check. And And then it's about the decision making, kind of who's actually accountable. So when we need to work with cross-functional teams across those, if you're still in functional silos, then who actually is the accountable person here? So rather than the 10 people that often we then get in a steering committee, it's what's the 3 people, or what's the 1? Like, how are we then being clear on the accountability at a leadership level so that we can then provide the team with the right then set up for being able to actually then get the stuff done. So that's kind of what I see in that. And then what I see is then, well, then how are we actually then making those decisions on a regular basis? Because it can't just be set and forget thing. We've got to then keep checking and challenging ourselves, whether that's the monthly, quarterly, annual kind of levels with the focus that we've then got. Are we on the right track? Do we need to make a decision? Do we need to pivot? Do we need to stay? Those types of things. Would also then be within that. And the thing that will then make it easier is how are we then doing all of that? And I think that's where an opportunity that I've been exploring this last year is then around tooling, because we've got a lot of governance rage, I think, and the manual production of all the stuff that we think that we need to make decisions on, but actually the data and insights are already there and they should be there. So how are we then getting a tooling ecosystem that then helps us to then be able to do that easier, and then actually facilitates the letting go maybe, or the process, or the regular checks.
Yeah, I think everyone's experienced, like, I think I've made my way through this process, and then there's this undeclared step that you just have to figure out by tripping across it. So yeah, where can I learn? What's going on? How do we find our way through it? And yet for those teams of teams, those value streams, how can they be less stuck in making those decisions and working their way through? Anything else, Luke, on this one?
No, I think we've covered it all, really, in terms of governance.
Fantastic. So those are the 3 key focus areas we really wanted to take, that like the big challenges identified by the report. There's also a section that we ask for those that want to go back and read it on, like, how is your company responding to change? And that's something there was a lot more positivity about. So most organizations, I think 55, 60%, something like that, said they were good at it. But we also picked up about 10 themes that those organizations had. So if you have a look at the report, it also plugs into that space. But this brings us, so we're 2/3 of the way through our hour. Any questions?